Continuing this discussion about needs and norms, these emergent norms are aptly called naturally emergent norms. NEN for short, these are natural guides to need relieving behavior that pre-exist human intervention. For example, water is the naturally emergent norm for relieving thirst. It remains the most abundant resource for restoring the body's homeostatic need for liquid equilibrium. Unless replaced with an alternative, experiencing thirst automatically triggers a response to seek water. Gender is another apt example. Nature is filled with male and female members of a species, but gender is less about the anatomical or reproductive distinctions and more about the social dynamics these distinctions create. An evolutionary purpose was served when the male emerged as the more aggressive and mobile one, as the leading hunter and protector. There likewise was an evolutionary purpose served when the female emerged as the nurturing one, who is closer to home and the one serving as the primary caregiver of the young. Were there not always some exceptions? These traits describe what is naturally possible within the scope of gender. Unlike norms for relieving physical thirst, gender is psychological and social, allowing far more variance. Too much aggression is not good, is it? This naturally emergent norm for masculine aggression is often counterbalanced by the nurturance of a caring feminine mate. This calming nurturance is present within the male. Intimacy with the female mate allows him to affirm what he already has access from within. It is about equilibrium in our potential gendered qualities. In her feminine nurturing, the mother is inclined to be overtly emotional. If confronted with a choice between which twin son to send away for military service, she was traditionally inclined to allow the masculine father to be the decisive one, or she may be just as decisive, if not more, than the father. This too expresses equilibrium of gendered qualities of a type of homeostasis. These naturally emergent norms provide the basis for our humanly constructed or convergent norms. HCN for short, these are established guides for relieving needs developed from human intervention. Drinking coffee to satisfy a thirst is one example. Favoring women to serve as nurses is another. These HCN, these convergent norms, potentially limit what is possible. Such HCN typically begin as individual behavioral norms. Behavioral norms are your own personal repeated reactions to felt needs, whether others are reacting in this way or not. Once you find a satisfying way to respond to some need, why not keep doing it? What if others follow your lead, or if you follow the behavioral norm of others? If it catches on and becomes an established pattern for meeting some need, then it can become a social norm. As long as two or more agree on how to respond to a shared need, this evolves into a humanly constructed norm in HCN on a social level. For example, when a new group is holding its first meeting, a practice may emerge for each person wanting to speak to first raise their hand. It is a social norm because it applies only for that social circumstance. When this becomes the expected way to consistently act within a group, because shared needs depend upon it, such a shared pattern of behavior converges into a cultural norm. Cultural norms exist in groups of any size, from a family tradition to legal standards that become established for society as a whole. Driving on the left side of the road in the UK, for example. At this level, cultural norms typically evolve from the catalyst of cultural leaders, such as clergy, politicians, policymakers, educators, jurists, writers, artists of various kinds, trusted entertainers, social activists, commentators, and cultural critics. These large-scale norms are the least amenable to change, so they tend to receive more collective effort to ensure they are right for the need. Of course, not all norms fit the needs of the group they are meant to serve. The more group members there are, the greater the inevitable variety of needs. This includes an array of trusted approaches to address such needs, leading sometimes to sharp and even violent disagreements. The larger the society and more diverse its membership, the more these norms tend to be broad generalizations in order to appeal to the broadest number of people. Sometimes significant differences are glossed over, and many find themselves following a norm better suited for someone else. Here there is great potential for HCN to look sharply different from their NEN source. This results in different types of normativity. Would it be helpful to illustrate this? Picture a naturally emergent norm as a normative curve. If you are familiar with statistics, you may recall how the normative curve accounts for 100% of what is possible in a given phenomenon. This phenomenon tends to gather around a midpoint, its mean, its average outcome. Homeostasis involves a continual pendulum swing across this ideal midpoint. The phenomenon potentially trails off in either direction to the left and right of the mean. This includes a possibility for extreme outliers at either end. This aptly describes the norms that naturally occur in nature, including those natural norms regulating homeostasis. There is a midpoint of moisture your body continually seeks, for example, with fluid intake and alcohol moving in either direction of this center. Likewise, there is a natural midpoint between how much we need to focus on our interactions with others, our social needs, and how much we need to focus personally on our individual selves, our ego needs. There is a relative midpoint which we continually traverse as we balance our day between time invested with others and time spent in needed solitude. There are many more examples, but does this help to illustrate how nature itself is filled with norms? These natural norms serve as the foundation for humanly constructed norms. Now think of a bell curve with less variation. It is narrower and taller. Illustrated here in red, this HCN, this humanly constructed norm, represents how our behavioral, social, and cultural norms frequently do not account for all that is naturally possible for resolving needs. In fact, these narrow norms tend to favor our basic needs over our growth needs. Our frequent reliance upon generalizations limits our awareness of the untapped potential within us all. As this HCN is squeezed, narrowed, pushed higher, this leaves a tip that actually falls outside of what is naturally possible for easing the need. This represents anormativity, when faithfully following a humanly constructed norm fails to relieve a need. A, as a prefix, denotes the opposite of its root word. In this case, it is the opposite result one would expect from abiding by the norm. Instead of lessening need, following certain humanly constructed norms, at least in certain ways, can actually frustrate needs and lead to increased discomfort. As basic needs get resolved, our growth needs can become hindered by these HCN, prompting us to be ineffectively inventive. Keeping safe within this narrower norm will typically result in satisfactory results. Eunormativity is when abiding by a humanly constructed norm actually relieves needs. For example, if you consistently slow down and come to a complete stop for yellow traffic lights, even while others rush through them, your felt need for a safer driving experience is at least met at your end. As long as your need for safety is satisfied, you are apt to associate it with how you follow your HCN for driving, even if you remain safe only by chance. The emotional linkage between one's customary behavior and enjoying consistent results is more potent than any objective result from following such norms. What about all that is possible outside of the narrower HCN? Those drawn to explore their full potential are compelled by nature to cross over the narrow boundaries of the stifling HCN and encounter transnormativity. Transnormativity is when transcending or transgressing the narrow confines of a humanly constructed norm results in relieving a need. Usually, this is a growth need stifled by those HCN intended more for basic needs. It is risking social rejection by stepping beyond expected behavior and discovering, however controversial or radically different, a unique way to naturally resolve some need, especially a growth need. It moves past humanly established ways of doing things and discovers, or perhaps rediscovers, the naturally emergent norms for growing into full being. For example, when someone is rigidly attached to the humanly constructed norms that traditionally defined gender and sexuality, transnormativity easily appears as intolerable deviance. What else can be expected from those whose basic needs still depend on these old norms? If your sense of security depends upon marriage as only between a man and a woman, then same sex marriage is an understandable threat. What needs illumination, however, is how deviance itself results from this evolved mismatch between HCN and its root. Sometimes the HCN even diverges from its NEN root. Divergence is the widening discrepancy between a humanly constructed norm and the naturally emergent norm it is based upon. Initially, both are centered around the same mean of possibilities. However, because of cultural dynamics, these sometimes begin to drift apart. This discussion will resume in part 3.